single gunshot on a narrow street in Sarajevo will end for empires, kill 17 million people, and drag the entire planet into a war no one believed possible. It is June 1914, and Europe stands at the edge of its own funeral pyre, though almost no one in the sunlit capitals of London, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, and St. Petersburg can feel the heat yet. For 40 years, the great powers have been building a machine of alliances, armies, and ambitions so intricate that no single hand controls it anymore. Kaiser Wilhelm II dreams of a German navy to rival Britain's. French generals still burn with the humiliation of 1871. Austria-Hungary, a crumbling patchwork of nationalities, watches Serbia with fear and contempt. And in the Balkans, the so-called powder keg of Europe, young nationalists are already sharpening the knives that will light the fuse. This is the story of how a continent that prided itself on civilization, science, and progress marched, smiling and cheering, into the single greatest catastrophe the modern world had ever seen. This is the story of how the guns of August began to fire, and why, once they started, no one could make them stop. The story of the First World War does not begin in 1914. It begins in 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, where a newly unified Germany humiliates a defeated France and proclaims itself an empire on French soil. Otto von Bismarck, the architect of German unification, has achieved his life's work, but in doing so he has planted a seed of resentment that will not stop growing. France loses Alsace-Lorraine, its industrial heartland along the Rhine, and an entire generation of French schoolchildren grows up staring at maps with a black mourning border around the lost provinces. Revenge, revanche, becomes something close to a national religion. Bismarck, aware of the danger he has created, spends the next 2 decades trying to keep France isolated and Germany secure through a dizzying web of secret treaties. He courts Austria-Hungary and Russia in the League of the Three Emperors, then pivots to a dual alliance with Vienna alone when Russian and Austrian interests in the Balkans prove incompatible. He signs a reinsurance treaty with St. Petersburg to keep Russia from allying with France, all while publicly proclaiming that Germany is a satisfied power with no further territorial ambitions in Europe. It is a system that requires a genius to operate, and it depends entirely on one man holding an impossible number of contradictory promises in careful balance. In 1888, the balance begins to crack. Wilhelm II ascends to the German throne. A young, insecure, and impulsive Kaiser with a withered arm, he tries desperately to hide an inferiority complex toward his English relatives that will shape world history. Where his grandmother, Queen Victoria, ruled the largest empire on earth, Wilhelm craves a German empire to match it. Colonies, prestige, and above all, a navy. In 1890, he dismisses the aging Bismarck, allegedly telling him that there was only room for one pilot on the ship of state. Wilhelm takes the wheel himself, and the reinsurance treaty with Russia, that delicate barrier keeping France and Russia apart, is allowed to lapse. Russia and France do not hesitate. Isolated Germans on one side, humiliated French and expansionist Russians on the other, Paris and St. Petersburg sign a formal alliance in 1894. Bismarck's nightmare, a two-front war against both France and Russia simultaneously, has just become a diplomatic reality, not merely a hypothetical. Meanwhile, Wilhelm's obsession with a place in the sun pushes Germany into a naval arms race with Great Britain that will poison Anglo-German relations for a generation. Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz begins building a high-seas fleet explicitly designed to challenge British naval supremacy, the foundation of Britain's entire global empire and security. Britain responds with the revolutionary HMS Dreadnought in 1906, a battleship so advanced it renders every existing warship on Earth obsolete overnight, and then simply builds more of them, faster than Germany can match. The two nations pour staggering fortunes into steel and guns neither can really afford, and ordinary Britons, once indifferent to continental squabbles, begin to see Germany not as a rival but as a genuine threat to national survival. Britain, which has spent a century deliberately avoiding permanent continental alliances, quietly begins talking to France. By 1904, Britain and France sign the Entente Cordiale, settling old colonial disputes and opening the door to military cooperation, though not a formal alliance. In 1907, Britain reaches a similar understanding with Russia, resolving rivalries in Persia and Central Asia. The Triple Entente is not a mutual defense pact in the legal sense the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy is, but in spirit and in the secret military conversations that follow, including detailed British and French staff talks about deploying a British expeditionary force to the continent, it functions as one. Europe has now sorted itself into two armed camps, each bound by treaties, staff plans, and mutual suspicion so tightly interwoven that a crisis anywhere threatens to become a crisis everywhere. That crisis will come from the Balkans, the most volatile region on the continent. The Ottoman Empire, once ruler of the peninsula, is collapsing, the sick man of Europe, and the vacuum it leaves behind is being fought over by ambitious new nation-states and the two empires that border it, Austria-Hungary and Russia. In 1908, Austria-Hungary formally annexes Bosnia-Herzegovina, a province with a large Serbian population that the young Kingdom of Serbia has long dreamed of absorbing into a greater Serbia. Serbian nationalists are enraged. Russia, self-proclaimed protector of the Slavic peoples of the Balkans, is humiliated when it cannot back Serbia militarily and is forced to accept the annexation. St. Petersburg vows never to back down again. The First and Second Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913 further destabilized the region. The Balkan states first unite to expel the Ottomans from nearly all their remaining European territory, then turn on each other over the spoils. Serbia emerges from these wars larger, more confident, and more militarized than ever, its army battle-hardened, its nationalist societies, including secret organizations with links deep inside the Serbian military and intelligence services, more emboldened than ever to complete the unification of the South Slavic peoples, by any means necessary, including terrorism against the hated Austro-Hungarian occupiers of Bosnia. It is against this backdrop that Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, decides to visit Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, on June 28, 1914, a date of deep symbolic significance to Serbian nationalists, the anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo. A secret Bosnian Serb nationalist society known as the Black Hand, with connections to elements of Serbian military intelligence, has trained a small group of young conspirators and smuggled them across the border with bombs and pistols. The security around the Archduke's visit is, by any reasonable standard, catastrophically inadequate. The first assassination attempt of the day is almost comically bungled. A bomb thrown at the royal motorcade bounces off the folded roof of the Archduke's car and explodes beneath the following vehicle, wounding several officers but leaving Franz Ferdinand unharmed. Astonishingly, after inspecting the wounded at the hospital, the Archduke's convoy takes a wrong turn back through the city, directly past a young Bosnian Serb nationalist named Gavrilo Princip, who happens to be standing on the very street corner where the driver stops to reverse the car. Princip steps forward, draws a pistol, and fires twice at point-blank range, killing Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie, within minutes. What follows is not an immediate rush to war but a month of feverish, secretive diplomacy historians now call the July crisis. Austria-Hungary, convinced correctly as later evidence would show, that the Serbian state bears at least indirect responsibility for the plot, seeks German backing before acting. On July 5, Kaiser Wilhelm II grants Vienna what history remembers as the blank check: unconditional support for whatever action Austria-Hungary deems necessary against Serbia, even at the risk of a wider war with Russia. Emboldened, Vienna drafts an ultimatum to Serbia so severe, demanding, among other things, that Austrian officials be allowed to participate directly in the investigation on Serbian soil, that it is deliberately designed to be rejected. Serbia, remarkably, accepts nearly all of the ultimatum's terms, rejecting only the clause that would violate its own sovereignty. It is not enough for Vienna, which has already decided on war and severs diplomatic relations. On July 28, 1914, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia and begins shelling Belgrade. Russia, unwilling to abandon its Serbian client a second time, orders mobilization of its armed forces. Here the alliance system, built over 4 decades to prevent exactly this outcome, instead guarantees its arrival. Germany's military planning, embodied in the Schlieffen Plan, assumes any war against Russia will inevitably become a two-front war against France as well, and that Germany's only hope of victory lies in defeating France in a lightning campaign before the slower Russian army can fully mobilize. Once Russian mobilization begins, German generals insist there is no time to lose. Germany declares war on Russia on August 1st and on France on August 3rd. To execute the Schlieffen Plan's sweeping attack on France, German armies must pass through neutral Belgium, whose independence Britain has guaranteed by treaty since 1839. When Germany invades Belgium regardless on August 4th, Britain declares war on Germany. In the span of 1 week, 5 great empires have gone to war not because any single leader wanted a general European war, but because a system of alliances, rigid military timetables, and mutual fear had removed the ability of any one government to step back without risking catastrophic isolation. Crowds cheer in Berlin, Paris, London, and Vienna. Young men rush to enlist, certain the war will be short, glorious, and over by Christmas. None of them yet understand that they are marching not into a 19th-century war of maneuver, but into an entirely new and unprecedented industrial slaughter, one that machine guns, barbed wire, and heavy artillery are about to make horrifyingly clear. By late August 1914, German armies are sweeping through Belgium and into northern France almost exactly as the Schlieffen Plan envisioned, brushing aside Belgian resistance at Liège and driving the French and British armies into a desperate retreat. Paris prepares for siege. The French government evacuates to Bordeaux. But the plan, drawn up years earlier by men who had never fought a modern industrial war, begins to unravel under the weight of exhausted men, stretched supply lines, and unexpected resistance. In early September, French commander Joseph Joffre, with British support, launches a desperate counterattack along the Marne River, halting the German advance within sight of the capital in what becomes known as the Miracle of the Marne. Both exhausted armies then attempt to outflank each other northward in a series of maneuvers historians call the Race to the Sea, until the lines finally reach the English Channel with neither side able to achieve the decisive breakthrough their pre-war doctrines had promised. What began as a war of rapid movement grinds, within a matter of weeks, into hundreds of miles of opposing trenches stretching from the Swiss border to the North Sea. The war of movement is over. The war of attrition, the war that will define an entire generation and reshape the modern world, has only just begun.